In 1933, the United States government made it a crime for ordinary citizens to own gold. Executive Order 6102 forced Americans to surrender their coins, their bars, even their family heirlooms, under threat of 10 years in prison and fines worth hundreds of thousands in today's money. The government paid them $20.67 an ounce in paper dollars. Then, less than a year later, it revalued that same gold to $35, pocketing a 40% profit overnight. It was the largest forced transfer of private wealth in modern American history, and it was perfectly legal. Now here's the question no one in power wants you to ask. Could it happen again? Not in 1933, not in some distant chapter of history, but now, in 2026, as the financial system strains under pressures that make the Great Depression look almost manageable. Welcome to the financial system. Control the money, control the history, and remember, simple is never easy. To answer that question, you first need to understand why Roosevelt seized gold in the first place, because the reason matters more than the act itself. In 1933, the dollar was backed by gold. Every paper note could be exchanged for a fixed amount of the metal. When confidence in the banking system collapsed, Americans did the rational thing. They lined up to trade paper for gold. They drained the Federal Reserve's reserves. The system was dying, not because gold was the problem, but because trust was gone. Roosevelt's solution was not to restore trust, it was to remove the option. By making gold ownership illegal, he eliminated the public's ability to escape the paper system. Citizens could no longer vote with their wealth. The exits were sealed. And once the gold was safely in government vaults, the dollar was devalued, enriching the state at the direct expense of every family that had complied. The Supreme Court upheld this by a single vote in the Gold Clause cases of 1935. The precedent it set was chilling. In times of crisis, the government can rewrite the rules of money, override private contracts, and seize wealth in the name of national interest. That ruling has never been overturned. It sits in American law like a loaded weapon, unused but never disarmed.
And this is where the present becomes uncomfortable, because the legal architecture for wealth seizure hasn't weakened since 1933. It has expanded. The International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, gives the president sweeping authority to freeze assets, restrict transactions, and seize property during a declared national emergency. It was used after September 11th. It was used during the pandemic. The threshold for activation is not a war or a depression. It is a presidential declaration, nothing more. Executive Order 6102 was not a one-time anomaly. It was the template, and the tools available today are far more powerful than anything Roosevelt had. In 1933, enforcement was crude. Agents couldn't search every basement or farm. Many Americans simply hid their gold and waited. The government recovered only a fraction of privately held bullion. The order worked not because of perfect enforcement, but because of fear. Today, that calculus has changed entirely. Financial transactions are tracked digitally. Bank accounts can be frozen with a keystroke. Gold purchases through dealers are reported. Cryptocurrency wallets are increasingly monitored. The infrastructure for total financial surveillance already exists. A modern gold seizure wouldn't require agents knocking on doors. It would require a regulation, perhaps even just a policy memo, and the banking system would enforce it automatically. So the legal power exists. The surveillance infrastructure exists. The only missing ingredient is the crisis, the pressure that makes a government reach for the most extreme tools in its arsenal. And that is exactly what 2026 is delivering. The United States national debt has crossed $36 trillion. Interest payments on that debt now exceed the defense budget. Over $1.5 trillion in commercial real estate loans are coming due, backed by buildings that have lost 40 to 80% of their value. Regional banks are sitting on more than $600 billion in unrealized losses, losses they don't have to report until they actually sell those bonds. The banking system is technically solvent on paper,
and functionally fragile in reality. Meanwhile, the global financial order is shifting beneath America's feet. China has been quietly accumulating gold. Independent analysts estimate between 20 and 30,000 tons, while systematically reducing its holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds. The BRICS nations are building alternative payment systems. Saudi Arabia, the cornerstone of the petrodollar, has joined an alliance explicitly designed to move away from dollar dependence. The demand for dollars that has kept the American system afloat for decades is eroding, and with it, the ability to borrow cheaply and print freely. Gold in this environment has surged to record highs. Central banks worldwide bought more gold in 2023 and 2024 than in any period since the 1960s. The message is clear. The institutions that understand money best are moving out of paper and into metal. They are preparing for a world where trust in fiat currency can no longer be assumed. Now here is the part most people miss. A gold seizure in 2026 would not look like 1933. There would be no executive order with that name, no dramatic announcement on the radio, no agents at your door. Modern confiscation is quieter, more sophisticated, and far more effective. It could come as a windfall profits tax on gold holdings above a certain threshold, say 50% on gains when gold crosses $3,000 an ounce. It could arrive as mandatory reporting requirements so aggressive that holding physical gold becomes a compliance burden most people abandon voluntarily. It could manifest through capital controls that restrict the movement of precious metals across borders. Or it could emerge through central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, that give the government real-time visibility into every transaction you make and the ability to program your money with expiration dates, spending restrictions, or automatic tax deductions. In 2013, Cyprus seized a portion of citizens' bank deposits to stabilize its financial system. They called it a bail-in. In 2022, Canada froze the bank accounts of citizens participating in peaceful protests. No criminal charges, no court orders, just frozen accounts. These were not hypotheticals from a dystopian novel. They happened in modern, democratic, Western nations. The playbook is not theoretical, it is operational. So, will the government seize your gold in 2026? The honest answer is not in the way Roosevelt did, but the honest answer is also this: they don't need to. The modern financial system offers tools of confiscation that are invisible, automatic, and far more efficient than Executive Order 6102 ever was. Inflation is confiscation in slow motion. Taxation of hard assets is confiscation by policy. Digital surveillance is confiscation of financial privacy, and emergency powers are confiscation waiting for a trigger. The lesson from 1933 is not that governments are evil. It is that governments, when the system they depend on is threatened, will do whatever it takes to preserve it, even if that means stripping citizens of their wealth and calling it patriotism. The rules of money are not laws of nature. They are decisions of power. And decisions of power can turn against you in an instant. The precedent has been set. The tools have been built. The pressure is mounting. The only variable is whether you recognize the pattern before it repeats, or whether you're the one left holding paper when the rules change again. Don't assume your wealth is untouchable. Don't assume the system will play by its own rules. When the system is threatened, the rules will change. If the government once made gold illegal, what would stop it from freezing digital accounts, seizing pensions, or taxing assets in ways that strip wealth from savers today? The precedent has already been set. The only difference is the form it takes. True financial freedom requires assets and knowledge that stand outside the reach of sudden policy shifts. Skills that no government can confiscate. Awareness of history, so that when the next emergency is declared, you recognize the patterns instead of being blindsided. Protect yourself not with blind faith, but with knowledge, awareness, and the pursuit of real wealth. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. Its financial system and history leaves clues. I show you where the money leads.